Hello, second graders. It's time for our knowledge and read aloud. But before we start, or while we start, I want to review some stuff because it's been a couple weeks since we even talked about this. All right. As you see, I'm dressed up like Abraham Lincoln because we're going to talk about Abraham Lincoln today. So if you recall, second graders, that there was the North, the northern part of the United States, and the South, the southern part of the United States. So not all the states have been established yet, right? There was territories, still a few territories. If we look at this map, okay, we have southern states down here, kind of the north up here, and then here it's like just unorganized territory. They're not states yet. Unorganized territory. They're not quite states. And we're talking about Abraham Lincoln becoming president and the expansion, which means to get bigger, the expansion of the United States. More the expansion of the Union. Okay? So if you guys recall, what were some of the differences between the North and the South? I'd like you to think about that. Some of the differences, well, the North we called the Union, and the South we called the Confederacy. Now, they were all one, and the people in the South, the states in the South, decided that they wanted to secede from the Union, which means they're no longer part of the United States. To succeed means to break off and say, you're going to be different. So they succeeded, okay? Succeed, not succeed like if we succeed in doing something, we accomplish it. But if you succeed, S-E-C, it's over here, I'll go over it in a minute, you break apart. So in the North, what were some of the differences? In the North, for the Union, the economy, which means how they spend their money, how they make their money, how they earn their money. The economy, we had that word earlier, they had mostly factories, right? Factories, they had manufacturing, which means they made stuff and sold it, okay? They had factories in the North. That's how the economy worked. In the South, if you recall, I don't know, I hope you can see this. If I turn on lights, I'm more clear, but we have this really bad glare on the board. So there's a light on over there, and then these two things here and here, that's from the glare from the window. It's the best we can do. All right, so back to our North and South talk. So in the South, we had mostly, you guys remember? If you can see that word, it says plantations. Plantations is another word kind of for farms, right? They had mostly farms. We usually use the word plantation depending on what is growing on the farm or growing, what is growing. So like a cotton, if you grow cotton, we call it a plantation. If you grow corn, we might call it a farm. Or wheat, we might call it a farm. Even though we grow those on ranches too. All right, so we had plantations or farms. Now, what things do you remember? What they grew in the South? What kind of plantations? What kind of farms they had? I have it up here if you can see it. Think about it. They had cotton, tobacco, and sugar. Those are the main things they grew. And that's how they made their money, is they grew those things and traded them and sold them, that sort of thing, okay? In the South, these people, what was important to them was their heritage, which means if mom and dad or grandpa and grandma had a plantation, then they get a plantation, and they want to live the same way of life, right? You want to kind of live maybe the way your mom and dad have taught you or have raised you to live. So that's your heritage, and they get that from their mom and dad too, okay? So heritage, people in the South, it was important to them. And in the South, a lot of them owned slaves to work on their plantations. Now, if you recall, the conditions for slaves, or those people that lived and worked on the plantations, wasn't very good. Okay, those people weren't treated well. In fact, they sometimes weren't even referred to as people. They were slaves, not people. So that's really not a very good thing. In the North, people wanted to abolish slavery. I underline that word abolish because we talked about that a ways back, but abolish means get rid of. They wanted to make it illegal to own slaves. For the most part, people wanted to abolish slavery, and for the South, for the most part, people wanted to be able to own slaves so they could have their way of life and continue their heritage. Okay? Now, as we talked about before, the United States had not expanded yet, right? There's still parts of the United States that aren't states, they're just territories. So people in the North or in the Union thought that any new expansion means grow or get big, any new expansion, that slavery should be illegal, okay? It should be free of slavery, which means there's no slavery. And people in the South wanted to succeed from the Union, and they ended up succeeding and making their own laws without the influence of the North or without the North telling them what to do, okay? So they wanted to succeed from the Union, make their own laws because they wanted to continue to own slaves. All right, so I'm going to move over here to our other board. These are some words that we're going to see or hear when I do the read aloud today. We've done Confederacy, which is the Union States, the North, right? Or excuse me, Confederacy, sorry. Southern states, I bet you all caught that. You're like, wait a minute, that's not right. The Confederacy were the Southern states that wanted to keep slavery. They thought their heritage was important, okay? So that's the Confederacy. I'm going to jump all the way down here to the Union, which is the northern states, right? They had factories. Okay, we refer to that as the Union states. Okay, we talked about succeeded. The southern states had succeeded from the north. Okay, and then the one word I want to bring up again is elected. If there's a president of the United States or a governor of your state or your senator, which every state has 2 senators, they are elected, which means they run and people vote for them. And basically whoever has the most votes becomes the president or the governor or the senator or mayor or whatever. Okay, they are elected. Okay, and that's how that works. So we talked about before, I'm going to bring this over. This is kind of a review part. Remember with Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, they had a debate. Now remember, we had a debate in class. We talked about our favorite kinds of candy. Some people like chocolate, some people like Skittles, some people like Reese's. And remember, the people who like chocolate said this is why the chocolate is best. People who like Skittles said this is why Skittles is best. People who like Reese's said this is why I like this, okay? So we just talked about what we liked about those things and what is good about those things and what's bad about the other things and why Skittles is better than chocolate or why chocolate is better than Skittles, okay? So that's a debate. And so if you recall, these people were excited about the debate. And the debate was between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. Now, we learned that Stephen Douglas was a very good talker, very good speaker. Abraham Lincoln also a good speaker, but Stephen Douglas was a very good speaker. Abraham Lincoln was tall and slim. Stephen Douglas, not as tall and not as slim, but very good talker. And in this debate that we read about, Stephen Douglas did a better job at the debate, but Abraham Lincoln actually won, became the senator from Illinois. And then later on, he became the president of the United States. So that's where we left off. And I want to start with Abraham Lincoln with our read aloud. Put that there. I'll come on over. And I hope you can see everything. It looks like you can see. If you'd like, you can start on the coloring page. Guys, this is the longest video of the day. Okay, so you can color this while I read. I'm going to read about the division of the United States. Okay. And I'm old and need my glasses. Sound like an old man when I say that. All right, so we have the picture of President Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election in 1860 to become the 16th president of the United States. Unfortunately, the election only proved how divided the country really was. Lincoln believed that slavery should not be expanded to the new states being formed in the West, just like we talked about. Many people in the North agreed with this idea and voted for Lincoln. In the South, many people disliked Lincoln. And in fact, people could not even vote for Lincoln in 9 states in the South because his name wasn't on their list of candidates to vote for. But despite not being on the ballot in 9 states, and without the support of a single Southern state on November 8, 1860, Lincoln was elected or chosen president because there were more people living in the North who voted for him. Many of the Southern states strongly believed that the North and President Lincoln wanted to take away their right to set their own laws and wanted to abolish slavery. The conflict was worsening. So I will turn the page. A couple months later, Lincoln was elected president. Something unbelievable happened, something Lincoln and many others had feared and hoped would never happen. Several Southern states seceded or declared they were no longer part of the United States. South Carolina was the first state to succeed. Okay, South Carolina right here. The states of Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas soon followed. Mississippi, right here. Florida, right here. Alabama, right here. Georgia, right here. Louisiana, right here. And Texas, right here. Okay, they broke off. Notice this is a different color now. Okay, if you can see that, this is gray, kind of a darker color. This is the blue, the northern states, and these are all just territories. Notice Oregon and California are part of the northern states. But Lincoln was not going to allow the United States of America to be broken up into 2 separate countries. Lincoln said that it was against national law for a state to succeed. Therefore, he said that he would do everything in his power to unify the country. He hoped that he would be able to do this peacefully, which means without war, peacefully. Nobody wanted war, including Jefferson Davis. But as the months passed, it became clear that it would be impossible to avoid it. Now, if you recall, I believe we talked, Jefferson Davis was the leader of the Southern states. To learn what happened next, it is important to know about an event that took place in the city of Charleston, South Carolina, April of 1861, just after Lincoln became president. Charleston was a beautiful, charming, and wealthy city in the South. Wealthy means they had lots of money in Charleston, okay? Its residents were proud of their beautiful city and proud of their Southern heritage. Okay? Heritage is a set of traditions that are passed down through generations. We talked about that, okay? The people of Charleston were very proud of their heritage and wanted to keep going with how it worked. Charleston was an important port city, so along the Atlantic Ocean there. Important ports like Charleston needed protection, so they built forts along the shore. Okay, here's the shore, so they had to build forts. Forts like these with their large cannons and soldiers were built to protect the harbor from invasion by pirates and enemy ships in times of war. Although Fort Sumter was in South Carolina, a Confederate state, the fort still belonged to the United States. The Confederates wanted Fort Sumter for themselves. They knew they could not have a real country of their own as long as U.S. soldiers were guarding the fort and controlling its guns. Fort Sumter also created a problem for President Lincoln. It was a fort located in an area now claimed by the Confederacy. President Lincoln had 3 options. 1, he could tell the U.S. soldiers to leave the fort. 2, he could send more U.S. soldiers to defend the fort against the Confederate soldiers. Or 3, he could send supplies such as food to the fort to see if the Confederate soldiers would try to stop them. This was a very difficult decision. If President Lincoln chose the first option, having U.S. soldiers leave the fort, he would be saying that he agreed with South Carolina's decision to succeed. So he didn't want to do that. If he chose the second option, sending more troops to defend the fort, the Confederacy might accuse him of starting a war. Well, he didn't want that either. So President Lincoln chose the third option, sending new supplies to see if the Confederacy would let the ships through. At the same time, the Confederates raised an army of their own. They surrounded Fort Sumter and tried to convince the soldiers inside to surrender. But the soldiers said they had orders from President Lincoln to stay put, and that's exactly what those soldiers did. They stayed there. Stay put means, yeah, they stay there. When the Confederacy heard President Lincoln was planning to send more supplies to the fort, the Confederacy opened fire. So now we have the start of the Civil War. I'm going to read this to you. It's kind of a description of what happened. Early in the morning of April 12, 1861, before the sun had even risen, a woman named Mary Boykin Chestnut sat upright in her bed as though she had awakened from a bad dream. Then she heard a sound, the same type of sound that had shaken her from her sleep, a distant low boom described in her diary. What do you think that low boom was? Thinking it must be thunder, she put her head back down on the pillow. The room was pitch black, but through the window she could see that the sun was barely beginning to rise, casting a light blue, slightly yellow light in the eastern sky. Suddenly there was a series of very loud explosions. Boom, boom, boom! These sounds were much closer. Mary Chestnut knew that the sounds were from cannons, not thunder. The cannons in the small fort nearest to the town were opening fire, and Mrs. Chestnut knew that these were the Confederate cannons. Mary walked out onto the upstairs porch in time to see the light from the nearby cannons as they fired another volley into the early morning air. Mary was witnessing the bombardment of Fort Sumter. All morning, all afternoon, and all through the night, the fort, for 34 straight hours, the Confederate cannons fired on Fort Sumter. The U.S. soldiers in the fort had cannons of their own, and they fired back. The air around Charleston filled with smoke from the explosions of the massive guns. Massive means very large, really big. As the house rattled from the boom of the guns, Mary Chestnut sat down and wrote in her journal, "Fort Sumter has been on fire." Then in the early morning of April 13th, all the guns fell silent, and the U.S. soldiers in Fort Sumter finally surrendered. Amazingly, nobody on either side had been killed or seriously injured by enemy fire. Damaged Fort Sumter now belonged to the Confederacy. More important, it became clear that war could not be avoided. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, more southern states joined the Confederacy: Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. I didn't say them in the right order. Okay. In all, there were 13 Confederate states, all from the South. There's 13 of these guys. It is important to remember that the states of Kentucky and Missouri did not actually secede from the United States, even though some people in those states decided to fight for the Confederacy. So that's why that's green. They did not succeed, but they did kind of decide to fight for the Confederacy. Kentucky and Missouri. The remaining states, those that had not succeeded, were in the North, and they became known as the Union. The Confederacy made a flag to symbolize its new country. The Confederate flag, pictured at the bottom left, has 7 stars to symbolize the first set of states that succeeded from the Union. The flag at the bottom right, with 13 stars, symbolizes the Confederacy after the Battle of Fort Sumter, when more states joined. States in the Union continued to fly the traditional flag of the United States, pictured on top, this guy, which at the time of the Civil War had 34 stars, one for each state, including the Confederate states. So they still had the stars on here of the 13 Confederate states. When the Battle of Fort Sumter, a new painful chapter of the American history began, Mary Chestnut, for her part, continued to write in her journal, keeping a record of the Civil War through the eyes of a Southerner. By the end of the war, Charleston, where it all began, was very fortunate that it was not burned to the ground like many other cities in the South. So, that being said, remember we talked about the country being torn apart. Okay, we talked about what would happen? Probably war. Do you think that happened? This is going to happen now? Yeah, it's happening now. So we look at this, the different flags. And I have this flag. I should hide it over here. Is this a Confederate flag? The flag of the Confederacy or the flag of the Union? Do you remember? Confederacy, right? It started off as this with the original 7 and went to here to the 13 states of the Confederacy. So the Union, which means they stayed together, were the states that were in the North. And the Confederate states are in the South. So all of the states, though, there's the Confederacy and the Union, they were all part of the Civil War. So if we fought to take Fort Sumter away from the United States in order to keep for ourselves, who would have done that? Who fought to take Fort Sumter away from the United States? Was that the Confederacy or the Union? They both fought, but the Confederacy won. Okay. So that being said, we have a couple sheets to do. Number 1, in your packet, I sent home blue crayons and gray crayons. I apologize, some of the blue ones, some of them are all broken, but that's the best we had in the classroom because they're in the back, and we're almost done with 3/4 of the way done through the school year, and there were a lot of broken crayons. So, all right. So this little map tells us what we need to do. If you look really closely, the Union states all have a little circle in them, like these. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, okay? Those are the Union states. The Confederate states have little triangles in them, like Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, okay? This is your key. The border states are the ones with the squares in them, all right? Oh, I didn't send home a green crayon. You can just leave them blank or color the border states green. What I'd like you to do with your crayons is color all the Union states blue, okay? Wisconsin, blue, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. These are blue. I want you to make a color-coded map, kind of like this, all right? But we're just gonna focus on the blue, the gray, and then a couple green ones, okay? Color the Confederate states gray. They're the ones with the triangles, okay? Gray, Confederate, Texas. So you want to color those gray, okay? Follow the borders of the states. And then the border states, they have a little square in them, like Missouri, Kentucky. I think over here, Maryland is one of those. So look really close. It's really small. So you want to color that green, okay? So color code your state, and I want to see a picture of that. Next, this sheet. I'd like you to draw a picture of what's going on in the Civil War right now. You can draw a picture of Fort Sumter. You can draw a picture of Abraham Lincoln if you would like. Draw whatever you'd like. Something that has to do with what we were talking. You can draw pictures of factories. You can draw pictures of crops. Draw whatever you like in here. And then I would like you to tell me 3 differences between the North and the South. The Confederate States and the Union States. Just give me 3 sentences. Okay, you can say the North, we talked about it. It's up on the board. You might have to pause me to finish that if you want. The North had mostly factories. People wanted to abolish slavery, and people felt that any expansion of the Union should be free of slavery, so no slavery. And these are what the people in the South wanted or had. They had mostly plantations. They grew tobacco, cotton, and sugar. People owned slaves. People wanted to succeed from the Union. So write me 3 sentences, the differences between the 3. They can be short, and we will be good to go with that. So get that done, and that will be the end of our read aloud and knowledge lesson. The knowledge lesson is going to be a longer lesson every day because we do this long read aloud, but it's good to know. We're talking about the Civil War. And I'm growing a beard like Abraham Lincoln. Next, we'll do handwriting and we'll finish up the day. Bye, everyone.